a lot of the things that we talked about earlier, right? We're talking about black budget, government secrecy, all those types of things. I don't want to go too much more into that because
we could talk all day.
You've discussed it at length, and there's a lot of interviews. It's in the documentary Unacknowledged. If you want to just talk about only that and somebody wants to learn more about that, there's an interview you did with Alex Jones where it's all you guys discuss. The reason I brought you on and I thought it would be a good fit is not because you're some random guy that's like, hey, I saw a UFO. You're tying everything back into consciousness. Everything you just said could have been one of my videos. And it's why I understand a lot of what you're saying about how these spacecrafts travel, because third dimension is like a fingernail to the universe. It's a very small bandwidth of all the universal energy. And we talk all about these types of things. And so as we're beginning to discuss this, as we're going into it in more depth, why don't you give us a quick overview of the 5 different levels of contact between these beings and leading up into your most recent documentary? I think that would be a good way to subway it in.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, a close encounter of the first kind is like what I was just describing, seeing an object within a certain fairly close range to where you can see the structure.
Okay.
A close encounter of the second kind is when there's some kind of physical evidence that results, like if they land and leave a marking or some physical, like a radar trace or something like that.
Okay.
So that's a close encounter of the second. Everyone knows a close encounter of the third kind from the Spielberg movie where you have an encounter with an ET biological being, an actual extraterrestrial being. And that's a close encounter of the third kind. Close encounter of the fourth kind is when you actually are taken and go on board a craft or have a contact where you go somewhere with the ETs. And a close encounter of the fifth kind is the first category that is not passive. All the others sort of just happen.
Okay.
Incidentally. A close encounter of the fifth kind is when we use our intention to make contact as ambassadors, as children of Earth, to these civilizations. So that, and that's using a number of different protocols. You can use a lot of different techniques, but the central concept behind it is that we're taking responsibility as citizen diplomats from Earth to these civilizations, and we are inviting them to come, as opposed to just stumbling across something. So there's an intentionality to it. There's a purposefulness to it, where we're saying we're going to take responsibility for the relationship between humans and humanity and these civilizations, and not just sort of relegate it to covert programs. We're going to do this ourselves. So that's why the close encounters of the fifth kind concept is so important, because it's the first one that's empowering to the individual and groups of individuals and to humanity as a whole to actually step into the relationship with these civilizations. And I will tell you that from my experience when I was 18, where I went on board a craft and sort of created these techniques with the ETs, that was how it happened. I was teaching them about
you met beings, you went onto their craft, and that's how you developed this thing that you teach now about doing it? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, it took about, I guess I was out there maybe 3 hours.
So you were literally like this to like me and you to them, like that?
Yeah, but transdimensionally. So I was like touched on my right shoulder. The ET came over to me. I was up on the mountain meditating, and I went into this deep meditation, at the end of which I was in the same state I was in that when I died 6 months earlier.
So you were in like the astral plane, or were you in like fifth dimension?
No, I was in my body, but my consciousness was fully integrated with a Brahman consciousness and unity consciousness.
Right, okay.
Even though my eyes were open. And I looked up at the stars, and the Milky Way was overhead up near this fire tower up and where I was on top of this mountain. And it had gotten very dark, and I realized that there was sort of a glowing over the crest of the mountain just below. And then I saw this creature I thought was a deer. I mean, I didn't know anything about this stuff. And it looked like a deer standing up. on all two legs, but had these beautiful eyes, and touched me on my right shoulder. And I was wearing a ski jacket because it was very cold up there. It was October of 1973. So this was, 47 years ago. And this touched me on my right shoulder, and all my hair stood on end. And I had a lot more hair then. And I just sort of teleported, boom, went point to point onto the craft. And then I stayed in that trans-dimensional state for 3 or 4 hours, meditating and teaching the ETs about what it's like for a young man on Earth to experience cosmic consciousness and how that can be used to make contact in the future. And so this went on for a long time. And then I came back maybe a quarter of a mile down this gravel road that went up to the top of this mountain. I didn't come back where I left from. I came back further down that road. And I thought maybe it had been 20 minutes, but it had been like 3 or 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's the sense of time and space is different in that dimension. I sort of had this strange anti-gravity field around me. So you know how you see them leaping on the moon, like I had no gravity. So I had this sort of, I was almost like quasi-levitating down the mountain, where I could just bound and go 20, 30 feet. It was like really cool. But that wore off by the time I got down to this little town where I was living. Wow. Up in the mountains of North Carolina, up in Boone, North Carolina. There was a school up there, Appalachian State University, I was going to. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. I didn't know what I was going to do with this. But I started practicing the techniques that we had sort of jointly developed. Because it had to be joint, because they had to understand how humans would do this. So I started this whole thing where every night before I'd go to bed, I'd go into a deep meditation. I would remote view where the ET craft might be, and I would guide them to come in to this little area. And every night I did, they were spotted, and the police, and they were on radar. It was crazy. I stopped doing it. I stopped doing it because it was like, freaked me out. I was like 18 years old. I was like, what am I doing? So, the following year I went off to become a meditation teacher. So I sort of finished college when I was 19 and then went all over the world doing that. But it wasn't until the 1990, many years later, that I just started to do this as a formal effort. And that's because I had these ETs show up in my house 3 different nights in a row, 3 months in a row, who gave me instruction about it. And this was in 1990. It was the full moon of January 1990, the full moon of February 1990, and the full moon of March 1990. And I'm a doctor with 4 kids, living in this house with a golden retriever. This was the last thing I thought I would be doing at that point in my life. And basically, I was told it was time to start a project.
Were you on psychoactive drugs at this time? Somebody might ask.
Actually, I've never done any drugs at all.
Wow.
Ever. I don't mind a scotch, or when I was younger, I didn't care if someone smoked some weed or something. But I've never done any psycho.
Understood, and I knew that, but asking for somebody that might be thinking that. So when I think about all
No, I didn't do any of that stuff. This was all based on consciousness. I always tell people, whether you do ayahuasca or not, everything that can be achieved through that, you can achieve naturally without the damage to the neurons.